This is Trekzone's That Time When.
Welcome to another edition of That Time When. Matt Miller with you from Melbourne. Thanks to the Peppers Hotel for putting us up for the next few nights as Trekzone Media takes off and is doing some work out and about. We are here in the heart of Melbourne. Docklands just behind me. It is absolutely teeming down, so I can't take you outside onto the balcony to give you a even better view. But nonetheless, we are here to bring you another edition of That Time When. This is the podcast where we catch you up on the past episodes of Trekzone, podcasts you might have missed or you haven't caught yet, or if you're new to the channel, you haven't seen the incredible back catalogue of Trekzone. On this edition, we're flashing back to 2019 when Larry beamed in and we had a chat about the anniversary of Star Trek's first filming week. That pilot, The Cage, a critical part of the Star Trek story, first put to film 55 years ago in 2019. And Larry beamed in to chat all about it back in 2019. Check this out. Well, joining me now to chat about this very exciting milestone is Mr. Larry Nemecek, Dr. Trek himself. Larry, good to see you again, man, since Vegas.
Hey, yes, good to see you and hear you, Matt.
How have you been? Hope things haven't been too busy as we wind down the year.
No, I mean, the year feels like it's winding up, actually, because
it does.
The short treks are coming out. People are excited about Picard. The more, drips and drabs we see. The animated lower decks and the hashtag Nick Trek. Those are on the way at some point. So, yeah. And then things in Trekland here are busy. The Trek Files is booming along. We've had some awesome guests and shows. And I have a Cyber Monday and some gift specials coming this holiday season that I've been working hard on for people. So,
well, we'll give you a special plug at the end of the show to make sure people stick around for that one. Of course, you can find Larry at Larry Nemecek on Twitter. But right now, I want to dive into 55 years ago this week. The Cage was filmed. Star Trek as we know it, or almost as we know it, was born.
Yeah, it's amazing how, little did they know at the time that somebody 55 years later would care about this one crazy pilot that one studio might go broke over.
And an incredible story as well about how Lucille Ball took a chance, didn't listen to the board, took a chance on Star Trek and tried to get it sold to NBC.
It's one thing we sit here and say, oh, Lucille Ball and did this, and it's surprising. And it's a story that I wasn't aware of that the first years of fandom until Bob Justman and Herb Solo's book came out in the late 90s. And I was kind of I read it and I went, oh, that's interesting. And it took a few more years for somebody to finally, phrase it in the form of, do you realize if it wasn't for Lucille Ball, we would not have Star Trek? It was like, oh, I never thought it that way, because it was crazy. I mean, they had produced their own sitcoms like I Love Lucy. She and Desi, when they were married, right? So they got divorced in 1960, 61. She remarried Gary Morton, who I didn't realize was a comedian. I was just refreshing here. But they ran the studio, and a lot of people co-produced with them, like Hogan's Heroes and Danny Thomas Show. A lot of things from the period, a lot of big names, but they were all co-productions. She hired Herb Solo to make the studio better than what it was, right? They wanted to get into, and they'd done The Untouchables, but that was black and white, and they just rented a bunch of old cars and used New York Street, and they could shoot over and over again. But they really wanted to upgrade the studio, and Lucy wanted to be it was like the second biggest independent producer in Hollywood. And then when MCA bought Review, Universal bought MCA, they were the biggest independent studio, and they had the three stages, the three campuses, I should say, what we now think of there at the corner of Paramount. But down at Culver City was where The Cage was actually filmed, and it's where they called it 40 acres, but it's where Mayberry and Stalag 13 from Hogan's Heroes and Mayberry from Andy Griffith and all of that. Desi Lou was a thing, and Lucille Ball was a real power at a time when people kind of, oh, it's Lucy and she's rich because she had a hit show and she's a funny comedian and she's got money, so she owns a studio. Well, she was actually head of it, and she didn't do the day-to-day nuts and bolts, especially after Desi left, but she still could, she was still a force to reckon with. And now it's interesting that today's lens, we go back and look at things. Sometimes we look at things less rosy with, we have a little clearer-eyed view of things in today's perspective. But one thing that's different is, like, here's a woman who was running her own studio. If you read their book, Bob Justman's so sarcastic. He's like, oh my God, we can't can't do these. What if they both buy them? What if CBS and NBC buy both shows? That would be great. No, that would be horrible.
Yeah, the ideas are beautiful, but actually putting them into practice.
Right. And these guys that they can churn out Lucy's half-hour sitcom, 26 or 30 times a year. But oh my God, we're talking about 1 hour and drama and competing on the, and yes, it was a 3-network world, right? ABC, NBC, CBS. And it's so counterintuitive to think that there were people, like when you're hungry and young and you're like, anything I can do to get some measure of success. I want to sell this pilot. Oh my God, my pilot got sold into a series. Oh, I got renewed. And the producer, but also the studio that owns it, it's doing it. And then the network that's showing it and all that. But here's a case where the guy, the old guard, they called them, all of her guys on the board that were all the different departments and the business and legal and all that, were terrified they had a status quo to protect. And here's Lucy wanting to be, she's not on a tear about it. She's not that's not her whole world, but her ambition is to do this. And she doesn't want to kill herself to do it, but that's her preference. But the old guard on her board is going, oh, it's going to cost too much. And, and oh, great. The 2 shows you got are going to be so, and, Star Trek is ambitious anyway, aliens, and you can't go down and rent a Falcons from Central Casting. You can't go down and rent a Starship Bridge console from whatever. It's got to all be built and all that, and the makeup and all of that, and the costumes. And Mission Impossible, you think, well, okay, it's a contemporary show, but they were always running around doing, European and Asian places, and they had disguises. Their makeup was as bad as Star Trek. So both shows were crazy expensive, and it wasn't that they got money to make the pilots, and then they made the pilots, and they both went over budget. But then Herb Solo sold them both, and they had to come back. And can you imagine if the 2 networks, and we're talking NBC and Star Trek, but CBS and Mission Impossible also. Can you imagine if the network bought the show, scheduled it for an order, like maybe 13 with a back order for another whatever, and then you go back to the studio, and then the studio neglects to make it? It's like, what would their credibility? Who would buy anything from them in the future?
And that's the funny thing as well. Like we look at it now, and there's a massive fandom that's been created around Star Trek, and millions of people around the world, are fans and dress up and go to conventions and stuff like that. At the end of the day, Star Trek was born out of a business idea, as you say, to give someone a retirement plan.
Well, I mean, somebody's retirement plan was almost the reason why they didn't make Star Trek. I mean, it was such a risky, crazy proposition. Not that it was science fiction, all that, but just looking at the numbers, the black and white numbers on the balance sheet. But Lucy had gotten Oscar Katz, who was very kind of a milquetoast guy, very conservative guy. But then they had hired Herb Solo to come in and shake things up and be the young pizzazz then, and he did it. You read the stories about how he coerced NBC into coming back, not just on the first pilot, but the second pilot, right? Because that's the other thing here is he got them to agree to a second one. But you're not going to run over. You've got all that. You don't have to spend anything, right? You built the costumes, you built the sets, right? So we're going to do this for a dime, right? Well, they didn't. They had a tinier budget, but they still went over that for Where No Man, right? But it comes down to it. Herb Solo goes in and sells it and coerces them into doing it. And not choruses, but I mean, he talks them into it. And but they actually have a board meeting, and on both shows, they actually have a board meeting where they debate whether or not to accept the offer and go to series, which is crazy. It's like, why did you do this entire exercise?